If you're over 60, or if you love someone who is, there's a good chance that somewhere in the back of your mind, there's a quiet worry about memory. Maybe you walked into a room and forgot why you went in there. Maybe you blanked on a name you've known for 30 years. Maybe you watched a parent or a grandparent slowly lose pieces of themselves to dementia, and now every little slip feels like a warning sign. I want to start by saying something that might bring you a little relief right away. Forgetting where you put your keys does not mean you have Alzheimer's. Walking into a room and forgetting your purpose for a moment does not mean your brain is failing you. These things happen to people in their 20s and 30s too. What we're going to talk about today is not about panicking over normal, everyday forgetfulness. We're going to talk about the real, practical, science-backed ways you can protect your brain as you age, reduce your actual risk of serious memory loss, and keep your mind sharp, curious, and strong for as many years as possible. Here's the truth that doctors and researchers have been discovering more and more over the last 2 decades. Your brain is not a fixed, unchangeable object that simply wears down like an old car engine. Your brain is alive. It is constantly changing, constantly adapting, constantly building new connections between cells, right up until the very end of your life. Scientists have a word for this. They call it neuroplasticity. It means your brain has the capacity to reorganize itself, to grow new pathways, to strengthen the connections you use often, and let go of the ones you don't. This is genuinely wonderful news, because it means the choices you make today, this week, this month, actually matter. They are not decorative. They are not just nice ideas for a healthier lifestyle. They are literally shaping the physical structure of your brain. Now, I know that when people hear about memory loss and aging, the word that immediately comes to mind for many is dementia, and often more specifically, Alzheimer's disease. It's worth taking a moment to understand what these words actually mean, because a lot of fear comes from not knowing the difference between normal aging and something more serious. Normal aging does bring some changes. Processing speed can slow down a little. It might take you a beat longer to recall a word or a name, especially if you're tired or stressed. This is sometimes called benign forgetfulness, and it is not a disease. It is simply part of being a human being whose brain has been running for 6, 7, 8 decades. Dementia, on the other hand, is a much more serious decline. It's not just slower recall. It's a progressive loss of the ability to think, reason, remember, and function independently in daily life. Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but it is not the only one. There's vascular dementia, caused by problems with blood flow to the brain, often linked to strokes or heart disease. There's Lewy body dementia. There's frontotemporal dementia. Each has its own pattern and its own risk factors. Here is something that surprises a lot of people when they first hear it. Researchers now believe that up to 40% of dementia cases worldwide might be preventable or delayable through lifestyle changes. Let that sink in for a second. 40%. That is not a small number. That means that while genetics certainly plays a role, and while nobody can guarantee they will be completely free of risk, there is an enormous amount within your control. This isn't wishful thinking. This comes from long-term studies involving hundreds of thousands of people, tracked over years and even decades, looking at what separates the people who stay sharp into their 80s and 90s from those who decline much earlier. So let's get into the actual practical things you can do, starting with one of the most powerful and most underrated tools available to you, and that is physical exercise. I know. You were expecting me to talk about crossword puzzles first, weren't you? We'll get to mental stimulation, don't worry. But if I had to pick the single most well-supported, most researched, most consistently proven way to protect your brain as you age, it would be movement. Physical activity does something remarkable. It increases blood flow to the brain, delivering oxygen and nutrients that brain cells need to survive and function well. It stimulates the release of a protein called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, sometimes shortened to BDNF, which acts almost like fertilizer for your brain cells. It helps existing neurons survive, and it encourages the growth of new ones, particularly in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is absolutely central to memory formation. In fact, some studies have shown that the hippocampus, that key memory center, can actually grow in size in older adults who engage in regular aerobic exercise. Grow, not just avoid shrinking. Actually increase in volume. That is genuinely remarkable, and it tells you that your brain is far more responsive to your daily habits than most people realize. Now, what kind of exercise are we talking about? You do not need to become a marathon runner. You do not need to join a gym and lift heavy weights if that's not your thing, although strength training does have its own brain benefits too, which I'll mention in a moment. The research consistently points to something wonderfully simple: brisk walking. Just 30 minutes a day, most days of the week, of walking at a pace that gets your heart rate up a little, that makes you breathe a bit harder. That's enough to make a measurable difference. If 30 minutes feels like too much to start with, 10 minutes is better than 0. 15 minutes is better than 10. The goal is consistency over intensity. Swimming is excellent too, especially for those with joint pain, because the water supports your body weight. Dancing is fantastic, not only for the cardiovascular benefit, but because it also challenges coordination and memory as you learn and recall steps. Gardening counts. Yes, gardening counts. Anything that gets your body moving, your heart pumping a little faster, and ideally gets you outside in the fresh air and sunlight, is doing real work to protect your brain. Strength training deserves a special mention here too. As we age, we naturally lose muscle mass, a process called sarcopenia, and this isn't just about physical strength and mobility, important as those are. Research has found links between muscle strength and cognitive function in older adults. Simple resistance exercises, using light weights, resistance bands, or even just your own body weight for things like chair squats or wall push-ups, done 2 or 3 times a week, can support both your physical independence and your brain health. You don't need fancy equipment. You don't need a personal trainer, although if that's accessible and appealing to you, wonderful. A few sets of simple movements in your living room a few times a week genuinely helps. Now let's talk about something that might feel a little less obvious but is just as crucial, and that is sleep. I think sleep is one of the most underappreciated pillars of brain health, especially for older adults. So many people accept poor sleep as just a normal part of getting older. They wake up multiple times a night, they struggle to fall asleep, they wake up too early and can't get back to sleep, and they simply resign themselves to it. But here's what's happening in your brain while you sleep that makes this so important to address. During deep sleep, your brain activates something called the glymphatic system. Think of it as your brain's own cleaning crew. While you're in deep, restorative sleep, this system flushes out waste products and toxins that have built up in your brain during the day, including a protein called beta amyloid. Beta amyloid is significant because it's the same protein that clumps together to form the plaques found in the brains of people with Alzheimer's disease. When sleep is chronically poor or insufficient, this cleaning process is disrupted, and these waste products can accumulate over time. Researchers have found that poor sleep quality and sleep disorders like sleep apnea are associated with a higher risk of cognitive decline and dementia. So what can you actually do about this? First, if you snore loudly, if you wake up gasping, if your partner has mentioned that you seem to stop breathing at times during the night, please talk to your doctor about being screened for sleep apnea. It's incredibly common, especially as we age, and it is very treatable, often with something as straightforward as a CPAP machine, and treating it can make a profound difference not just in how rested you feel, but in your long-term brain health. Beyond that, good sleep hygiene really does matter. Try to go to bed and wake up at roughly the same time every day, even on weekends, because your brain loves rhythm and predictability. Keep your bedroom cool, dark, and quiet. Limit caffeine in the afternoon and evening, since it can linger in your system longer than you might expect, especially as metabolism changes with age. Try to get some natural sunlight exposure earlier in the day, because this helps regulate your circadian rhythm, your internal body clock, which in turn helps you sleep better at night. And be mindful of screens right before bed. The blue light from phones, tablets, and televisions can interfere with the production of melatonin, the hormone that helps you feel sleepy. Now let's talk about food, because what you eat truly does shape how your brain ages. There isn't one single magic food that will protect you from memory loss, no matter what an advertisement might promise you. But there are dietary patterns studied extensively over many years that show real measurable benefits for brain health. The two most well-researched are the Mediterranean diet and something called the Mind diet, which was specifically designed by researchers to combine elements of the Mediterranean diet with another pattern called the DASH diet, with a particular focus on foods that benefit the brain. What does this actually look like on your plate? It means leaning heavily on vegetables, especially leafy greens like spinach, kale, and collard greens. Studies have found that people who eat at least one serving of leafy greens per day show a slower rate of cognitive decline compared to those who rarely eat them, with some research suggesting the difference is equivalent to being several years younger cognitively. It means eating berries regularly. Blueberries and strawberries in particular have been studied for their high concentration of flavonoids, compounds that appear to have protective effects on brain cells. It means choosing whole grains over refined ones, nuts as a regular snack, and olive oil as your primary source of fat rather than butter or heavily processed oils. It means eating fish, particularly fatty fish like salmon, sardines, and mackerel, at least once or twice a week, because these are rich in omega-3 fatty acids, which are a fundamental building block of brain cell membranes. And it means being genuinely cautious with red meat, processed foods, fried foods, and pastries or sweets, not eliminating them entirely necessarily, but keeping them as occasional choices rather than daily staples. I want to be honest with you about something here too, because health content online can sometimes feel like it's selling you something. You do not need expensive supplements to get these benefits. Whole foods, actual food on your plate, consistently show stronger and more reliable benefits in research than pills and powders. If you're considering supplements, particularly anything marketed specifically for memory or brain health, please talk to your doctor first. Some can interact with medications you're already taking, and the supplement industry is not regulated nearly as tightly as prescription medication, which means claims on the label don't always match what's actually inside the bottle or what the science actually supports. Let's talk now about something that connects deeply to both physical and mental health, and that is your cardiovascular system, your heart and blood vessels. This might seem like an odd place to focus when we're talking about brain health, but here's the thing. What's good for your heart is overwhelmingly good for your brain, and what's bad for your heart tends to be bad for your brain too. Your brain relies on an incredibly rich network of blood vessels to deliver oxygen and nutrients constantly. When those blood vessels are damaged by high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, or smoking, the effects show up in the brain, sometimes through tiny, silent strokes that a person might not even notice happened, but which accumulate over time and contribute significantly to cognitive decline, particularly vascular dementia. This means that managing your blood pressure is one of the most important things you can do for your brain, not just your heart. If you have high blood pressure, working with your doctor to keep it under control through medication, diet, exercise, and stress management is genuinely one of the most protective things you can do for your future cognitive health. The same goes for blood sugar. Diabetes, particularly when poorly controlled over many years, roughly doubles the risk of developing dementia. If you have diabetes or prediabetes, working to keep your blood sugar in a healthy range through diet, exercise, and appropriate medication is protecting your brain as much as it's protecting the rest of your body. And if you smoke, please know that quitting, even later in life, even after decades of smoking, brings measurable benefits to your brain health within a relatively short period of time. It's genuinely never too late for this particular change to matter. Now let's shift to something people often think of first when they think about brain health, and that is mental stimulation. Keeping your mind active does matter, but I want to explain why it matters in a slightly different way than you might expect, because I think it will help you choose activities more wisely. The idea behind mental stimulation isn't simply keeping busy or distracted. It's about building what researchers call cognitive reserve. Think of cognitive reserve like a kind of buffer or backup system in your brain. The more diverse, complex neural connections you've built over your lifetime through learning and mental challenge, the more resilient your brain becomes. Even if some cells or connections are damaged by age or disease, a brain with strong cognitive reserve has more alternate pathways to draw on, more routes to get the same job done. This is actually why some people can have significant physical signs of Alzheimer's disease in their brain on autopsy, yet showed few or no symptoms during their life. Their cognitive reserve was strong enough to compensate. So how do you build this reserve? The key word is novelty. Your brain doesn't get nearly as much benefit from repeating an activity you already know well as it does from learning something genuinely new and challenging. If you've done the same crossword puzzle style for 20 years, your brain has essentially mastered that particular pattern, and while it's certainly better than doing nothing, it's not providing the same growth that comes from tackling something unfamiliar. This is why learning a new language, even later in life, shows such strong benefits in research. It's why learning to play a musical instrument you've never touched before is so powerful, engaging memory, coordination, and pattern recognition all at once. It's why taking up a new hobby entirely, something like painting, pottery, woodworking, or photography, if you've never done it before, tends to offer more cognitive benefit than continuing with something familiar. Even something as simple as taking a different route to a familiar place, or trying a new recipe instead of your usual dinner rotation, or switching which hand you use for simple tasks occasionally, introduces a small amount of novelty that keeps your brain engaged and adapting. Reading remains genuinely valuable too, particularly if you occasionally choose material outside your usual comfort zone. Board games and card games that involve strategy, like bridge or chess, have shown particular promise in research because they combine memory, planning, and social interaction all at once. Which brings me to something I think is one of the most overlooked and underestimated protective factors of all, and that is social connection. I want to spend real time on this one because I don't think it gets nearly enough attention compared to diet and exercise, even though the research behind it is remarkably strong. Loneliness and social isolation have been linked in numerous large studies to a significantly increased risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Some research suggests that chronic loneliness may increase dementia risk by as much as 50% compared to those with strong social connections. That number is genuinely comparable to some of the physical risk factors we've already discussed, like high blood pressure or lack of exercise. Social interaction is, in a sense, one of the most complex cognitive workouts your brain ever does. Think about what actually happens in your brain during a real conversation with another person. You're processing language, reading facial expressions and tone of voice, accessing memory to bring up relevant stories or information, managing the back and forth timing of dialogue, and often navigating subtle emotional dynamics all at the same time. It's an extraordinarily rich, multi-layered mental workout, and it's one that isolated activities, even mentally stimulating ones like solo puzzles, simply cannot replicate. For many people over 60, social circles do naturally shrink. Retirement removes the built-in social structure that a workplace provided. Friends and family members may pass away or move further away. Physical limitations can make it harder to get out and see people as easily as before. If this describes your situation, please know that rebuilding social connection, even in small, manageable ways, is genuinely one of the most powerful things you can do for your brain. This doesn't have to mean becoming the most social person in your neighborhood overnight. It might mean joining a local group centered around an interest you already have, whether that's a book club, a walking group, a religious or community organization, a volunteer opportunity, or a class at a local community center. It might mean scheduling a regular phone call or video call with family members so that connection happens consistently rather than only when it happens to occur. It might mean simply making more of an effort to chat with neighbors, or getting to know the people at a regular coffee shop or grocery store you visit. Volunteering deserves particular mention here because it combines social connection with a sense of purpose and meaning, and research has found that having a strong sense of purpose in life is itself independently associated with a lower risk of cognitive decline and even a lower risk of death from any cause among older adults. Let's talk about stress too, because chronic ongoing stress takes a real physical toll on the brain, not just an emotional one. When you experience stress, your body releases a hormone called cortisol. In short bursts, this is a completely normal and even helpful response, helping you deal with an immediate challenge. But when stress is chronic, when cortisol remains elevated over long periods of time, it can actually have a damaging effect on the hippocampus, that memory center in the brain we talked about earlier. Chronically high cortisol has been associated with impaired memory function and, in some studies, with an increased risk of cognitive decline. This is particularly relevant for older adults who may be dealing with ongoing stress from caregiving responsibilities, financial worries, health concerns, grief, or loneliness, all of which are unfortunately common experiences in this stage of life. The good news is that stress management doesn't require anything elaborate or expensive. Mindfulness and meditation practices have a genuinely strong body of research behind them at this point, showing benefits for both stress reduction and, in some studies, for actual measurable changes in brain structure, including in areas related to memory. You don't need to become an expert meditator or sit in silence for an hour. Even 5 or 10 minutes a day of quiet, focused breathing can help lower your baseline stress levels over time. Time spent in nature has shown similar benefits, lowering cortisol and improving mood and cognitive function, which is one more good reason to take that daily walk outside rather than on a treadmill indoors when possible. Deep breathing exercises, gentle yoga, prayer. If that's part of your life, listening to music you love, spending time on a hobby you find genuinely relaxing rather than stressful, all of these count as legitimate stress management tools. The goal isn't to eliminate stress from your life entirely, which isn't realistic for anyone. The goal is to build in regular practices that help your body and mind recover and reset. I also want to touch on alcohol, because this is a topic where the science has actually shifted somewhat in recent years, and I think it's worth updating what many people may have heard in the past. For a long time, there was a popular idea that moderate red wine consumption specifically was protective for the brain and heart. More recent and more rigorous research has called this into question, suggesting that the benefits of moderate drinking may have been overstated in earlier studies, and that alcohol, even in moderate amounts, carries real risk, particularly for brain health. Heavy drinking is clearly and strongly linked to a significantly increased risk of dementia, including a specific and serious form called alcohol-related dementia. If you drink, keeping consumption modest, generally meaning no more than 1 drink a day, and having regular alcohol-free days, is a reasonable, cautious approach. If you don't currently drink, this isn't an area where the research supports starting for the sake of any brain health benefit. Let's talk about hearing, because this is genuinely one of the most surprising and important findings in recent brain health research, and it's something that far too few people know about. Untreated hearing loss has been identified as one of the largest modifiable risk factors for dementia in some major research reviews, actually the single largest modifiable risk factor identified. This might seem strange at first. Why would trouble hearing affect memory and thinking? There are a few likely explanations. First, when your brain has to work extremely hard just to make sense of sounds and words because your hearing is impaired, it has fewer resources left over for other cognitive tasks, including forming and storing memories. Second, hearing loss very often leads to social withdrawal. It becomes exhausting and frustrating to participate in conversations you can barely hear, so people gradually stop attending gatherings, stop calling friends, stop engaging in the very social interactions we just talked about as being so protective for the brain. And third, some research suggests that the sensory deprivation itself, the brain receiving less auditory input over time, may contribute to actual structural changes and accelerated shrinkage in certain brain regions. The genuinely encouraging part of this finding is that hearing loss is highly treatable. If you've noticed you're turning the television up louder than you used to, if you find yourself asking people to repeat themselves often, if family members have mentioned you seem to miss things in conversation, please consider getting a hearing test. Modern hearing aids have improved enormously in both function and appearance compared to even 10 or 15 years ago, and research has found that using hearing aids when hearing loss is present is associated with a meaningfully reduced risk of cognitive decline compared to leaving hearing loss untreated. This is one of those changes that can feel almost immediately rewarding too, because so many people report feeling more connected and engaged in life again once they can hear clearly. Vision matters here too, for very similar reasons. Regular eye exams, updated prescriptions for glasses when needed, and prompt treatment of conditions like cataracts all support your brain's ability to take in and process information from the world around you, which supports overall cognitive engagement and reduces the risk of social withdrawal and isolation that can come from struggling to see clearly. I want to talk for a moment about something that connects many of these threads together, and that's the importance of regular medical checkups and being proactive about your overall health rather than waiting for problems to become obvious. Many of the conditions that significantly increase dementia risk, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, thyroid problems, vitamin B12 deficiency, and even depression, can be present for years with subtle or no symptoms, and can often be identified through routine blood work and checkups with your doctor. Depression in particular deserves attention here because it's sometimes mistaken for or mixed up with early cognitive decline, since it can cause real difficulties with concentration and memory. The encouraging thing is that depression is treatable, and addressing it can improve both quality of life and cognitive function. If you've been feeling persistently low, unmotivated, or withdrawn, please don't dismiss this as just a normal part of aging. It's worth discussing with your doctor. I also want to gently mention medication review, because this is something that often gets overlooked. As we age, our bodies process medications differently than they did when we were younger, and certain medications, including some very commonly prescribed ones for sleep, allergies, and anxiety, particularly a class of drugs sometimes referred to as anticholinergics, have been associated with an increased risk of cognitive impairment when used regularly over long periods. This absolutely does not mean you should stop taking any medication your doctor has prescribed without discussion. It simply means that periodically reviewing your full list of medications and supplements with your doctor or pharmacist, especially if you're taking several, is a genuinely worthwhile practice to make sure everything you're taking is still necessary and that nothing is working against your cognitive health. Now, I want to address something important, because I think it will bring you real peace of mind, and that's the difference between normal age-related forgetfulness and warning signs that genuinely warrant a conversation with a doctor. Normal aging might look like occasionally forgetting a name, but remembering it later, sometimes losing your train of thought, needing a moment longer to find the right word, or misplacing items from time to time. These are common and not typically cause for alarm. What's worth paying closer attention to and discussing with a doctor includes things like asking the same question repeatedly within a short period of time, getting lost in familiar places, having significant difficulty following a conversation or a familiar recipe you've made many times before, noticeable changes in judgment or decision-making, withdrawing significantly from hobbies and social activities, and, importantly, changes that family members or close friends notice even if the person themselves doesn't recognize them. If you or someone you love is experiencing these kinds of changes, please don't let fear keep you from seeking an evaluation. Early diagnosis of any cognitive condition allows for earlier treatment, better planning, and in some cases, addressing underlying causes that are actually treatable and reversible, like thyroid problems or vitamin deficiencies, which can sometimes mimic dementia symptoms but resolve completely once properly treated. As we bring all of this together, I hope what stands out to you isn't a long, overwhelming checklist that feels impossible to follow all at once, but rather a genuine sense of hope and agency. Your brain, even now, even today, is capable of change, growth, and adaptation. The habits that protect it aren't exotic or expensive. They're things like taking a walk, getting outside, eating more vegetables and fish, prioritizing real sleep, staying connected to the people you love, learning something new every so often just for the joy of it, managing stress with intention, getting your hearing and vision checked, keeping up with your medical care, and giving yourself grace for the ordinary forgetfulness that comes with being human. You don't need to do all of this perfectly, and you certainly don't need to do all of it starting tomorrow. Pick one thing from everything we've talked about today. Maybe it's scheduling that overdue hearing test. Maybe it's committing to a 15-minute walk after dinner each evening. Maybe it's calling an old friend you haven't spoken to in a while. Small, consistent choices, repeated over months and years, are what actually shape the trajectory of your brain health far more than any single dramatic change ever could. Your brain has carried you through 60, 70, 80 years of memories, relationships, challenges, and joys. It has earned your care and attention now, and the wonderful truth is that it remains remarkably capable of responding to that care at any age, starting from wherever you are right now, today.